Hello, world singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is Cosmere Conversations.
Welcome back, everyone. So good to be on the mic with you listening here. We have a little divergence from the norm, almost a non-Cosmere conversation. It's like as close as it can get without getting a special title.
Yeah, we are here today to talk about a tiny little snippet of a potential First of the Sun story that was actually mentioned in the State of the Sanderson, but I glossed over it as I read because I assumed it was the same thing as the Sixth of the Dusk sequel that we've already talked about. Yes, but Kingmaker is an entirely separate thing and may or may not be a real thing, which usually we do not talk about on this podcast. We are a canon-only type of pod. However, I love Six of the Dusk, so we're gonna dive in anyway.
Now, Brandon shared this with a audience that was present at a book signing and launch event for Cytonic. So this was just happening at the end of 2021. As we said, we saw it in the State of the Sanderson, overlooked it a little bit because we were like, oh, we were so on top of the Six of the Dusk sequel that Brandon read earlier in 2021 that this Kingmaker snuck right under the radar. And I will preface our entire episode by saying we're not going to read the entire thing as we did previously. It's a little bit too long. It takes about 20-25 minutes for Brandon to read through, and it is available on YouTube. Kingmaker and Brandon Sanderson brings it right up. So if you want to listen to the story, go there. It has not been transcribed anywhere that we could find, and so therefore we leave it to Brandon to bring you the story in his own glorious voice, and we will just provide commentary on the story because that's what we do here.
Yeah, just a quick recap in case you have seen on the internet Kingmaker flying around references, words, and you're like, what is this? Here you go.
First off, we should say that this story is not about Dusk and does not include anything seemingly connected to the stories that we got, be they the brief snippet of the sequel or the original work itself.
This is something completely different. It would be a young adult novel if it ever becomes a thing. Brandon only has a very rough first draft here of a couple of chapters. He didn't get super far on it, but it's something he might come back to in the future. Obviously, we all know he has a lot of projects to get to, so I think this is way on the back burner.
I do think his process of writing the background of this story is interesting enough, and it is where I would like to focus a little bit throughout the episode. But beginning with the background of this story, Brandon prefaces his reading of the story by saying that his family went on a trip to Fiji, and one of the things that he likes to do is take places that he has been, places that he has traveled, and experiences that he's had, and turn that into a story world, or to incorporate things that he learned from the real world into a story. And that's basically what is going to be the inspiration for this work on First of the Sun.
While they were in Fiji, they went to a local village that had a traditional social structure with a chief, and they learned that the chief, in this case, does not choose their own successor. There's a separate person from a completely different family line whose job it is to choose the next leader of the tribe, and that person is called the Kingmaker. And Brandon thought this idea was really fascinating, and so that's kind of where this whole story came out of.
Certainly with our background and ethno-European-centric world that we live in here in the United States, most familiar when it comes to kings and queens, of it being a real important thing that they can pass on to their direct descendants.
Yeah, family line.
But on this island of Fiji, or in this specific tribal situation on Fiji, they have this secondary role from a different family entirely, and that family is also important and significant in their society as the Kingmaker
Yeah, they have
family.
their own power. It's a way for them to diversify power and have a little bit of a check and balance, even while having a monarchy, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Definitely here in the United States, we love our checks and balances.
Yes.
It's like the primary thing.
Gotta diversify power.
And it's interesting to see how other societies and other cultures incorporated checks and balances without necessarily creating a bicameral legislature or other aspects of a modern world government.
And even in these first two tiny bits, a prologue and a chapter that we get, pretty much everything that we've discussed here is addressed, which I think is pretty interesting. There's a little bit of talk about family line and about how the chiefs in this fictional First of the Sun world would like their chiefdom to pass down to their descendants, and sometimes that works if the Kingmaker likes it, and sometimes not. And they also talk about how beneficial it is to have a check on the chief's power, and the Kingmaker in some ways functions as a police officer specifically for the chief to make sure that the chief is also following the rules of the society.
Now, the real struggle or the mystery that is begun during the prologue is that we are introduced to the chief, who is preparing for his own death. We find out that he has a malignant tumor, and right from the beginning, the words that Brandon is using are keying us in to huge changes that have happened on First of the Sun.
It seems to be quite far removed in time from even the sequel, from Sixth of the Dusk. There seems to have been a lot of time that has passed.
And their technology has grown seemingly exponential, very similar to what happened on Scadrial after the events of Mistborn Era 1, launching them into Mistborn Era 2. Just very quickly, things that are mentioned in the prologue, kind of displaying the passage of time and the technological growth. They talk about having trains and ships that are moving both people and goods around the different islands throughout their society. They use specific linguistic phrases in regards to their description of what is happening medically to the chief.
Right.
And
just the fact that they know like what cancer is, what a malignant tumor is.
Yes. And they have the very long, like in our language, Latin based, where the names are all 97 different
syllables.
Exactly. And that's seemingly what is going on here. He, has gastrointestinal malignant tumor, blah, 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 blah. And that fact that they have not only grown from a technological perspective, but also from a scientific perspective and an understanding of the world definitely is pointing to some type of great leap forward in the First of the Sun world that we imagine, or at least I think, is predicated on the arrival of the ones above, the Scadrians and the Rasharians.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we read in that last snippet of the sequel for Sixth of the Dusk, they are facing this question of whether or not they capitulate to the ones above, so to speak, whether or not they give them what they want. And it seems, at least from this rough draft set in the future from then, that they have. And that is indicated in a few different ways. One, the technology that you're talking about, but then two, there are some worrying mentions of lack of AVR on the islands.
And remember, that was the one thing that the Scadrians were very interested in. We want your AVR. And then the Rasharian shows up with, brilliant shard plate, but maybe spren plate?
Space plate?
Yeah. Who just says, like, we're going to take it and we're going to give you a better deal than the Scadrians. To me, it is reflecting what Dusk said in that scene, which is that you've already been conquered. The fight is over.
It's over.
Yes, everything that was going to happen has happened, and you all, the advisors, are playing catch up. And that's what I think has happened, is that the world was taken over by either the Scadrians or the Risharians. And while there has been a great leap forward in terms of technology, they probably lost the AVR because they're described as very rare at this point.
Yeah, or at least there is clearly some sadness associated with the AVR, a feeling of loss. They do mention many times in these short passages that a lot of the technological advances have been accomplished on their own, obviously piggybacking off of what they have learned in the past from the ones above, but there are discoveries and inventions that are coming from the people. They weren't given these items directly from the ones above. So that indicates to me that maybe they are no longer in contact with the ones above.
Could have moved on to a different location if their only goal was to kind of harvest
or
the
they're just
magic
like
resources.
Visiting less often because they have the infrastructure for the export set up.
That would make a lot of sense if, we follow the Thydakar route of being the trade master. And once you got the trade set up, you don't need to go there anymore and keep threatening
That's
people.
the whole point. Automate it.
Coming back to the chief, he is dealing with his own death, preparing for his own death, saying, he asked all the questions, received all the answers. He's comfortable with what is going to happen. He will die. The Kingmaker will select a new individual. But then he hears a person approaching or coming into his home.
And the chief is blind. So he's basing everything on auditory input.
And he calls out for his sons, and his first son,
his
second
nurse.
son.
Yeah.
And he's saying, who's there? And the person who comes into his room is a murderer and is going to strangle the chief, ending the prologue. And then we jump forward into the first chapter, and we are introduced from that omniscient perspective to a new character, a young woman who is the Kingmaker.
Yeah, and that's a convention that Brandon is playing with in this draft, which is something that I don't know that we've seen him do in any other books. The third person omniscient voice, where the narrator of the story is maybe not the protagonist and is speaking directly to the reader, breaking the fourth wall, so to speak.
And it definitely is something that Brandon calls out and says specifically, I don't know if this works perfectly, but it created some fun moments and interesting uses of language. And I think that's a fair criticism. It's a harder way of writing, I believe, to be dealing with this kind of omniscient voice.
I think it can be done really well and can offer you some unique opportunities in storytelling. This is a first draft, we have to remember. And so for me, at least in this first draft, the omniscient point of view kind of came and went, where sometimes it almost seemed like the protagonist was speaking. And then there would be these like weird points where you would be reminded that it's some omniscient person that is, you know, to this point faceless. And so that was a little bit like whiplashy for me.
And so we have this young woman who is the Kingmaker. She is traveling by boat from one island to another and is giving us a lot of these details about the advancement in the world, how they have progressed, and the different types of technology that we see from that Six of the Dust sequel.
Yeah, it's the first chapter of what would be a book, so it's obviously a lot of just like scene setting, painting the picture of the world, because a lot of it is told kind of from just inside her head, from her own perspective. But again, it's like from an omniscient perspective-ish. But this world that she's describing, as we said, she describes that AVR seem to be more rare. The more dangerous sea creatures are said to have been hunted to extinction in populated areas
What I found interesting is the way that these tribal societies that would have existed on the islands and basically, been a tiny kingdom for a chiefdom for the chiefs to rule over have become incorporated into the broader, more democratic system.
Governmental systems have totally changed.
And so you still have the remnants of the traditional chief structure, but now there are elected representatives that are going to, what we would call like the National Assembly or the big organization. They serve alongside the chiefs. The chiefs are still there, but I would imagine it's a diminishing role over time for the chiefs.
Yeah,
more of a ceremonial role.
Yeah, she says something about the chiefs being like responsible for tradition and like upholding traditions. So it seems like they're more responsible for that type of thing, keeping maybe holidays and celebrations alive, whereas the elected representatives might be actually governing a lot more of the day-to-day type things.
Yeah, and this definitely seems like a furthering of that check and balance that we were talking about earlier. There certainly are countries in our world, France has a split role for their leaders. They have a president and a prime minister. England, obviously, has the monarchy still in place that is almost entirely ceremonial and like a tourist trap. JK, all you UK people, they're great. But you also have, in Japan, a similar thing. There is a royal family that does still exist, but they have basically been completely supplanted by a modern governmental structure that is based more on what we would call like a democratic process.
Yeah, I don't know if we should call it modern, but it's more of a democratic structure. In addition, like we said before, we hear about Native people inventing and creating their own technologies. And then we also hear this interesting commentary on the way that the Kingmaker's role has changed as well. There used to be a Kingmaker on every island, as part of every tribe. But now there's not. There are a few Kingmakers that travel between islands, like this one that we are hearing the perspective of is currently. And the Kingmakers don't necessarily have that close of an eye on the chiefs. It seems like the governing body has kind of taken over that role of check and balance in that way. The Kingmakers sometimes don't even like attend the coronations of the new chiefs. They just send a telegram and say like, yeah, cool, your son can take over. It's fine.
Yeah, definitely seems like, in the Middle Ages when the Pope crowning the king was a really big, important deal. And like people would travel from hundreds of miles away so that they could watch the crown be picked up by the Pope and then placed on the head. And then eventually Napoleon was like, I got this, bro. I don't need you no more. Puts the crown on his own head and basically like ends that tradition.
Like, we good.
Yeah, exactly. And then declares himself emperor and takes over most of Europe. That's how that goes. And I am curious to see, well, we don't know if we will ever see more of this.
Yeah.
But I would be curious to see what is the role of this Kingmaker specifically. The introduction of her age as like a questionable aspect.
Oh, yeah.
So she is very young. Kingmakers are generally not. And then the role of the Kingmaker changing so much over time. It seems almost like she is being set up more as an investigator of this death that happened.
That's what
in the
I was
prologue.
thinking, that like it has to be like a mystery story, right? Where she arrives and then is trying to solve the murder.
Mm. That's kind of the feel that I got, that she would, be traveling to this island, preparing for the death of the chief. And then when she arrives, they're like, oh, he's already dead because of this murder. And that could definitely, set you off into a cool story, a murder mystery type of story. And she is expressing the doubts that she has, arriving on this island. Is she going to be revered in the same way as Kingmakers would be in the past, and what her kind of role in society is? Then Brandon ends the reading and, finishes the first chapter, first chunk of the first chapter. And we're left with his explanation, which, as you mentioned earlier, is kind of like, this is a first draft. It is very much a work that may never see the light of day, but I was very intrigued by this concept of a Kingmaker and wanted to incorporate it into a story and a story world that I had already built.
Yeah, he's very upfront with the issues that this first draft has. And I just thought it was really interesting that he is so forthcoming with works that are so raw and, like literally a first draft, hasn't really worked on it at all, has a lot of issues. And yet he is so generous with his work and so free of ego to be able to share these things with us.
That's kind of what I would like to focus on a little bit, is that process that Brandon is going through. So often we are, just heaping praise on this individual. Oh, he's a super genius. He writes so much. He's a writing savant. And what we see here is that not only is he generous with his process, but there is a series of different events.
Yeah, it doesn't start out just genius from the get-go.
Exactly. And there are editors and
writing is work, kids.
That's our message today. But I think it's important to have that perspective on the creation of the Cosmere in general, is that a lot of this is a lot of work by a lot of different people.
Yeah.
It's not just Brandon sitting in a room writing up masterpieces and then throwing them out to us, like dogs getting scraps from the table.
Let them eat cake.
No, it's like a series of drafts and revisions and drafts and guest readers and people giving input that Brandon cares about and incorporates. And that is really what I took away from this, is the Kingmaker story could never see the light of day. It could be incorporated in a different way.
Yeah, or it might come to being and look completely differently from this excerpt that we've just gotten.
I find that type of incorporation of, past work or previous work to be really interesting.
Me too. I think it's so interesting every time that Brandon says that pieces of works that are canon and have been published have come from other things, even like Aether of Night, which we're going to be talking about soon. He says there are some different pieces in terms of like characters and the magic system that he's going to pull out of this world and like incorporate into other stories, other worlds, which is so weird to me because, we read these books and it feels like, oh, of course, obviously it had to be like this. There's no other planet that you could put Raoden on. Raoden belongs on Cell in Elantris. And so it's just wild to me to imagine the way that his brain must work to be able to like just pick out these pieces and then create something completely new with them. And like, it works.
And it's not the first time that he has done this, as you were just saying with Raoden, but also probably the prime example is Way of Kings Prime.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has a almost unique magic system. It has a structure with the 10 surges that is familiar to the Radiants. The character of Dalinar exists in Way of King Prime, but it is a different story, and it is now, at this point, a published work in that you can go find Way of Kings, you can buy it, or you can have it as part of a collector's set. But of course, that has then turned into the full Stormlight archive, where the character of Dalinar is not a one-to-one comparison of what happened previously. And so just the way that story worlds are built, the way that characters change over time, that worlds change, and certainly the magic systems change over time, is all really interesting. And that's why I think something like Kingmaker is worth talking about, is because we don't quite know how it's going to be incorporated in the future. We could be seeing a Kingmaker-like check and balance that happens on another planet.
Different world.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. He might take that convention and just plant it in a different place.
Because I could definitely, there are places that I'm looking around and I'm like, where could this fit in? Even something like the Pure Lake, which I know doesn't have this type of structure, but it is like a segmented out population, a little bit more backwards than the quote unquote modern parts of Rashar. And you could imagine a weird little system working, or maybe it's part of the Horn Eater society.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
that could definitely be an aspect that I could see worked in there. And you could just keep going down the list of where this type of stuff could fit into the Cosmere. That is all that we have on the Kingmaker, but we don't want to end it there. We would just want to do a hard turn and go over into some fan feedback, hearing from the fans, both our fans and Brandon's fans. So we'll do some word of
Mostly Brandon's fans.
Of course.
Just people who listen to us.
Why don't you start us off with a fan theory that was in response to our episode on the book back blurbs and the Sleepless?
Yes. Adam sent us a link to his very well organized and presented theory about the Sleepless. Adam, I really appreciated how clear your theory was illustrated. And it is quite long, but in a nutshell, Adam says, in plain English, quote, I believe the Sleepless over thousands of years will spread across all the shard worlds, adapting to local geography, cultures, and magic systems. Independent swarms will be connected, capital C connected, with the local investiture and the shardic intent, and when the time is right, they will take up the power of each shard. Once possessing all the shards, the Sleepless, communicating via their mental link, will re-identify as a single entity, pulling together all of the aspects and powers of Adonalsium. This, in my opinion, is the most elegant way to overcome the barriers of a human or a dragon reforming Adonalsium, namely geography and identity. End quote. Great theory. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, the question of what are the Sleepless, what are they doing, what is their role, is definitely a big mystery, and I love Adam's way of putting it together. I think that this also kind of goes along with some of the other characters that we are seeing. Obviously, Hoyd is seemingly pulling lots of different bits of investiture.
Collecting, exactly. Investiture.
But then seemingly we also have the Scadrians in that Six of the Dust sequel who are very clearly saying, like, we're going to take your AVR. We want that resource. Have they done that on other planets? Are they going to other
it
planets
certainly
after?
Seems like it.
So like, are they also doing a harvesting of the different shard powers across the Cosmere? It seems like maybe multiple different groups, entities, or individuals are all doing the same thing, which maybe is about reforming Adonalsium.
I feel like in that case, it would be more like accidental, because I feel like these are human beings we're talking about. Like, they are just trying to get more power for themselves. I don't know if they have a lofty spiritual goal.
Maybe I would agree with that in just the very general way, and that's probably what's motivating the individual Scadrians or Rasharians that we saw in that sequel. But if they are guided by someone like Thydakar or like Mraize, who may have a far longer plan and longer lifespan to create those long plans, then they could be taking advantage of the natural urge to just have power.
Maybe.
And you just direct them in the right way. But that theory does play into my other question that I have here, which is about everybody's favorite sentient sword, Nightblood. Because while Nightblood is mainly seen as a destroyer of things, what if he is also a collector of things, of investiture specifically?
Okay.
The question very generally has been asked several times, both to Brandon and generally just on the internet, which is, can Nightblood kill Hoyd?
Okay.
Now, Brandon has answered this, and I believe we may have mentioned this in a Word of Brandon episode. Could you help me play back and forth? I'll be the questioner who says, quote, what would happen if Hoyd held Nightblood?
Hoyd would not do that. Hoyd would stay very far away.
Not even to hold it?
He would stay really far away. There are very few things in the Cosmere that Hoyd is afraid of, and Nightblood is one of them.
I thought he would be afraid of the pointy end.
So let's just say if very, very, very few things in the Cosmere had a chance of destroying you, you wouldn't even pick one up. You'd try to be in a different room entirely. End quote. So we have Nightblood destroying again.
Yes, and Hoy definitely being afraid of Nightblood. After what we saw in Rhythm of War with Odium, I certainly believe that Nightblood has the capability, if he is completely empty, fully hungry, and wants to eat, he can absolutely kill a vessel. And Hoyd, you know, even if he was a Dawn Shard, was a vessel, whatever, he's going to be on the same tier of a vessel or lower. He's not going to be higher than a vessel.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if he's as high as a vessel.
Exactly.
He might have a little bit of extra investiture, which may allow him to resist being killed by Nightblood as quickly.
Yeah.
Notice as quickly, because I think the way that it works is that Nightblood sucks investiture. And so, for example, if you're on Nalthis and you only have the one breath that you were born with, then the only thing past that is your soul. So Nightblood grabs the breath, and then the only thing left for it to grab is your soul, and then you're dead. So if you have some additional cushion of additional investiture, it probably takes longer for you to be killed, which is what we see with the vessel, right? Nightblood just like sucks and sucks and sucks all of the investiture until it hits the soul of the vessel.
And at that point, it is also full and seemingly unable to continue drawing out the investiture from the shard itself. It basically hits a limit.
I'm trying to remember, is that what happens? Or is Taravangian immediately sucked into the vacuum and then like there's no more problem?
No, I believe that it hits an upper limit. After it kills the vessel, it's described as like sluggishness. Like Nightblood becomes sluggish. And
Nightblood definitely does get sleepy and lethargic sounding after he eats, but that happens even if he doesn't eat something as big as a vessel.
So the question being, can Nightblood kill Hoyd? I think the answer is probably yes, and that's why Brandon's saying Hoyd is not going to even be in the same room as Nightblood if he can avoid it. My theory relies on the aspect of, if Nightblood is pulling in all of this investiture, where is that going? Is it being stored in, like, just imagine with me, the hilt of Nightblood? I think it's more like magical storage, you know, the cloud storage.
I don't think it's being stored. I think that Nightblood is functioning like a human, or like Lift, where it has an input, and the input is used to like sustain its consciousness, I guess.
Okay, maybe.
And so the energy that it gets from the consumed investiture is used in like another process, just the way that we use food to like fuel our processes. And then eventually we need more input.
Understood. If that is not the case, because remember, there was an input that gave Nightblood.
I mean, we do store fat, so like maybe maybe Nightblood has some fat.
Yeah, just some belly fat.
Some energy stores. Maybe that's the hilt, but it only has like a hilt-sized store. Like it's not just storing every single piece of investiture that it absorbs.
That would be my theory, is that the consciousness for Nightblood came from the breaths in its original creation, and that's what the five scholars did. The investiture that it then, quote-unquote, destroys, it's not destroying the investiture, because you can't destroy magical energy from the spiritual realm.
No, it's not. It's just absorbing it.
Yeah, absorbing it, and then, I guess, either A, venting that back into the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
Or B, is collecting all of that investiture into some type of cloud storage system where all the investitures are one. And then this would be like Adam's theory with the sleepless, where all the things have become one.
You think Nightblood is going to be ad nauseam?
That is my crazy theory of the day, everyone.
Well, people are really into your crazy theories. I'm starting to feel a little unwelcome on the pod. Many people wrote in, commented to say that they liked your theory about one of those other book back blurbs being about Ba-Ido Mishram.
Yes, we had some debate all across our different
My brother
medias.
texted me and was like, Brooke, you're wrong.
Oh.
Tyler is right about this. Don't be crazy. And I was like, Okay.
Because we had other people who were saying we were both wrong. And that's how I feel more
true.
often. What I feel happens most often is that someone who's much smarter than us is just like, you both clearly made a mistake. And one of our fans on Twitter, Q10 Fanatic, said that, quote, the blurb about Shallan wasn't talking about Testament, which is what you believed, or Ba'edo Mishram, which is what it was about reviving Maya. Maya knows the forgotten knowledge that will damn all the people of Rashar. It's the dark secret of the Recreants and why they chose to abandon their oaths and all of Rashar, end quote.
I think that's a really good call. I think that's the explanation that makes the most sense. I think in any case, I have a problem with that blurb, and like, it's just kind of lazy writing. I just have a problem that they're included in this section that is supposed to be about Shallan. It's like referencing things that are not really about Shallan. And so I think I just have a problem with the writing of that blurb more than anything. Like, sure, it can be about Maya. I just don't want it to be in that place.
Understood that you want it to stay really focused on Shallan, and maybe
like, don't pretend like it's about Shallan if it's about Adolin and Maya.
Definitely could be getting a little bit too esoteric.
Courtney also wrote to us on Facebook to say she definitely thinks that it's Ba'edo Mishram. She also said she thought that it was probably referencing Maya, but then she says, quote, maybe it's not a debate over which one fits. Maybe the similarity of Testament and Maya are an indication of what's to come with Ba'edo Mishram. Essentially, it trapped Spren, that's in Shallan's storyline, and draws out of captivity in some way that storyline is not what you think it is.
Okay, I like this theory because we are both all right and all wrong. And that's my favorite way to look at things.
She also says that she thinks Ba'edo Mishram is like not going to be an evil power, but might end up being more sympathetic. And I think we're kind of both in that boat as well. We feel like Ba'edo Mishram is going to be revealed that she is more sympathetic and more beneficial than scary as an unmade.
Hard agree there. Another fan from Reddit, user Club77, noted that after watching the latest or one of the latest Marvel movies, The Eternals, they noticed a lot of similarities between Nightblood and a Marvel character / magical item, the Ebony Blade.
Oh, yes. I remember you telling me what that blade is supposed to be in the comics, and I was like, so it's Nightblood.
Yes, absolutely. It is. So their question was basically, is this a chicken and an egg situation where Nightblood clearly is something like the Ebony Blade? It was originally from Marvel Comics in the 60s and 70s, so it's one of the older items and has a long history that we're not going to go into here. But the basic concept is a magical dark blade that also has some like cursed elements going on. And Brandon has specifically not answered that question directly, but in a tangential question about Nightblood, he said that he was partly inspired by a sword Stormbringer, a sentient vampire sword from the Elric Chronicles by Michael Moorcock, a series that I've never read and don't know anything about. But when you trace back kind of all of these different elements, starting with Brandon Sanderson, going to Michael Moorcock, you can actually start to see how these sentient or semi-sentient blades are all referring and referencing one another. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of go from Nightblood and Brandon Sanderson to Michael Moorcock to the Ebony Blade, and you just get this pattern that is very interesting where authors are inspired by what's going on in the culture, in society, what other authors are doing, and especially from times when they were young and developing. So Brandon was probably reading Moorcock during his developmental era, who was maybe reading Marvel Comics in the 60s and 70s when the Ebony Blade was on the scene. And that's always like a fun journey to go down. I don't think that any one of those things is like a direct reference to the other, but it is fun to follow that train of inspiration.
Can I say one more thing about the Eternals relation to the Stormlight Archive? I feel like there's a good start for the Knight's Radiant armor on the Eternals.
Oh, okay. You like some of their armor
As I was
choices?
watching, I was like, this could be shard plate. This could be a cool shard plate.
Yeah,
I feel it. They each have their own color, and their armor like glows a little bit in that color. And I was just like, okay, there's somewhere to start. We got this.
It definitely was visually a spectacular movie. And while we are not going to spoil or ruin any aspects of that, because that would be a different podcast.
That would be our spin-off podcast, Cuddling Excuses.
It certainly is going to be interesting if there are Cosmere movies and TV shows in the future, then what become the inspiration for those things? They basically have to look at the Marvel movies and other similar programs that we've talked about, like the Wheel of Time and XYZ, as their sources of inspiration, and also the things that they need to be better than. Like nobody comes into it and is like, well, we're going to be worse than everything that came before. They're always trying to one-up each other, and that can lead to some problems, but also can lead to a continual advancement of more and more cool visual effects in movies and television shows. And then we have definitely a fun one, but maybe a little sad one to end the podcast with.
No. Going out on a downer note?
Well, I mean, I don't want it to go on a downer note. What I want to leave us with is a super fun Reddit thread that had asked the question, describe your favorite character in the worst way possible.
Okay. I like it.
Exactly. And so we're going to give a couple of shout outs here. Remember, if you want to play along with these types of things, you can always follow us on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, all the different social medias, even on Patreon, where you can get special extra bonus episodes. To the Reddit thread, your favorite character in the worst way possible. I began telling Brooke about this thread with this line here from user Venley Timber, quote, "A blonde, a brunette, and a redhead walks into a bar and orders a bottle of Horneater White."
It's so good.
Genius. You're a genius out there, Venley Timber. Genius. For other Shalon-specific ones, we have Murderous Orphan mocks a member of the military and steals his boots.
Good. Yeah. Another one, we have Tinkerbell, but she can actually kill you if Peter Pan orders her to do it. Obviously. Syl.
Syl as Tinkerbell is hilarious.
It's perfect.
And also, Kaladin as Peter Pan is not bad either. Like, that's fine. Just, I think...
Yeah, especially if you're talking about the actual book Peter Pan.
Yes, exactly.
In which Peter is not nice great at all.
Yeah, he's bad. Way worse than Kaladin, just for the record. Like,
way worse. Way worse. But Kaladin's not like the jolly guy in the Disney movie.
For example, one user said, quote, "A depressed Peter Pan fights crippling depression and caste systems rather than magical pirates."
That's good.
That's not bad.
Good.
That's not bad at all. Could you read this one from user No Necessity?
"Blonde himbo with one brain cell but killer fashion sense still isn't potty trained." I take issue with that.
Let us never forget that Adolin has on multiple occasions gone to the bathroom in his shard plate.
As has every other night on Rashar. And also rude.
The himbo?
Yeah, Adolin's way smarter than that.
Obviously, it's a bad way of describing the
characters.
I'm just
saying.
That is the point. You can't get defensive.
Rude. I will defend Adolin to the death.
Here we go. Here's another one for Adolin. Quote, "Absolutely the only mentally stable character. Kind of just a dude in a world full of superheroes."
That's accurate.
Exactly. There you go.
That's fine. Okay, I think this one is my favorite. "Inanimate object does not spontaneously burst into flames in exchange for a small amount of magical light."
The
obviously
object of court?
Stick. So
how dare
funny.
they do not spontaneously burst into flame. Okay, and then let's go with the one that could be kind of a downer, but also was undoubtedly the winner of the thread, according to users, which is from user TrunksChan31. Quote, "Disgruntled father forgets to let his wife know they're having a barbecue."
Ouch.
Ooh, burn.
Oh my God. Insensitive.
It does not stop. Too soon? It's only been 15 plus years or something.
People really hate on Evie.
That is our quick foray into what's going on in the Cosmere internet today. Thanks so much for staying with us. If you have any quotes, comments, questions, or concerns, you know how to get a hold of us. Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.